Hello, everyone. I'm Claudia Kaiser, and today I will be talking to you about mirror touch synesthesia. So, just for some background before we begin, synesthesia is a neurological phenomenon where stimulation of one sensory pathway leads to the automatic and involuntary experiences in another sensory pathway. Synesthesia is thought to be a genetic condition as it tends to run in families, and a high proportion of females report having synesthesia, leading to the speculation of it being carried on the X chromosome. Mirror touch synesthesia is a specific type where individuals feel a physical sensation on their own body when observing someone experiencing that physical sensation. And this affects about 2% of the general population. So, to simplify it, a person with mirror touch synesthesia might see somebody hit their arm against something and consequently feel their own arm being hit against that something. What sets mirror touch synesthesia apart from other synesthesias is the presence of the mirror touch system, which is found in all individuals, not just those with synesthesia. The mirror touch system activates the same sensory areas in the observer and the observed, and the relationship between the activation of the observed and the observer leads to the unconscious simulation of sensations in others, and this enables us to understand the sensations of others. The mirror touch system essentially allows us to understand what others are feeling when we observe them. The exact mechanism behind mirror touch synesthesia is not fully understood, but can begin with the understanding of the mirror touch system, which consequently is the mirror neuron system. The mirror neuron system is groups of specialized neurons that imitate or mirror the behaviors of others and is still being researched due to the major complexities involved. Observing an action and imitation of that action seem to activate the same neural pathways. This circuit runs through the superior temporal sulcus, which can be seen here in green, the inferior parietal lobule, which can be seen here in yellow, and the pars orbicularis of the inferior frontal gyrus, which can be seen here in blue. And with novel task imitation, prefrontal and premotor areas are also implicated. The superior temporal sulcus is implicated in audio-visual integration as well as the perception of motion. The inferior parietal lobule is implicated in sensory processing and sensory motor integration, and the pars orbicularis of the inferior frontal gyrus is implicated in language production and the inhibition of movement. The superior temporal sulcus in green is thought to receive information from the pars orbicularis of the inferior frontal gyrus in blue, and this interaction between the two pairs the visual information of the observed action and the predicted sensory response of that motor action. So basically, it combines what is being seen done, the observation, and the prediction of what touch sensation would result from doing that observation. Observation of a novel touch or motor stimuli, one that the individual has not done or experienced themselves, indicates the above regions as well as the prefrontal and premotor areas because they involve motor preparation. The main study when referencing mirror touch synesthesia is one by Banassi and Ward. They did 2 experiments where participants were asked to report the location of actual touch on their cheek while observing another person being touched and attempting to ignore the synesthetic touch from observation and only report the actual touch. This was done by the location of the actual touch being either congruent in the same place or incongruent in different places as synesthetic observed touch. And the experimental design is seen here on the left with possible responses. So the participants will be shown someone being touched and will actually be touched on that same cheek. All participants should report being touched in the same place as the observed touch since they were actually touched there. This would be the congruent trial. The implication of mirror touch synesthesia comes in from the incongruent trial. Participants would observe being touched on their left or right cheek and actually be touched on the opposite cheek. For control groups, so people without synesthesia, there was no difference in reaction time between congruent and incongruent, and they had very little errors involved in their reports of where the stimuli occurred. This is applied to there being no confusion about where they were actually being touched, unlike in mirror touch synesthetes. For participants who presumably had mirror touch synesthesia, seen over here, they had significantly slower reaction times overall, but even slower in the incongruent trials, and a significantly greater number of errors in reporting the location of touch. The slower reaction time, especially in the incongruent trial, and the increased number of errors is indicative of confusion in locating touch stimuli and sensation when observing touch stimuli. This supports the existence of mirror touch synesthesia, and is one of the main references when talking about the existence of mirror touch synesthesia. There are two theories of why mirror touch synesthesia occurs, and the first is the threshold theory. This theory states that there is a threshold of the mirror touch system that is responsible for the conscious experience of touch. In most people, the somatosensory system activity does not reach the threshold to experience the physical sensation when it's just observed. But overactivity of this somatosensory system in synesthetes leads to the conscious feeling of being touched from observing. This is the first explanation for mirror touch synesthesia through experiment using fMRI with Blackmore and associates. They took a female subject who reports experiencing tactile stimulation when observing touch on another person, who they named C, and measured her against control groups using fMRI. All participants were subject to a touch session and a video session of fMRI, and this is exactly what it sounds like. The touch session consisted of participants laying in the MRI with their eyes shut and being touched on the face. Baseline was found when no touch was occurring. And the video session consisted of video clips of people being touched on their face and neck by the finger of another person. The fMRI on the right, I know it's a little hard to see. This is the image that they gave us. She's just supposed to show the increase of activation in C compared to control non-synesthete participants. And you can see a little better here in B as opposed to A. But these findings were supported by the self-report, as seen here on the left, of tactile intensity sensation by subject C during the video sessions. And she rated her intensity of tactile sensation on a scale of 0 to 5. And as you can see, most of those are close to 4. So pretty high intensity for somebody who is not feeling any tactile sensation other than what their brain is creating. This increased activation of implicated brain regions in subject C was the first reported possible explanation for why mirror touch synesthesia occurs, and is the main support for the threshold theory, stating higher activation is the cause of mirror touch synesthesia. The second theory is the self-other theory. And this states that the mechanisms for self-other control act as a gate for the mirror touch system and are atypical in people with mirror touch synesthesia. Self-other control is the ability to distinguish the self from others, And similarities between the observer and the person being observed increases the degree of vicarious feeling, because the observer does not perceive the other person um, to be that as other, but as self due to those similarities. In synesthetes, these self other mechanisms intensify these vicarious responses from witnessing touch and open the so called gate or reach the threshold for the mirror touch system to stimulate a physical response from observation. This is complementary to the threshold theory as it suggests amplified activation or overactivation of brain regions during observation induce physical touch stimuli, which is the threshold theory, but with the additional input of this increased amplification is due to the perception of similarities and therefore an extension of the self. This theory is supported by an experiment showing the changes in perception of physical touch from observing touch based on how similar the self, uh, based on how similar to the self the observed person is. Um, Fittingly, the title of this experiment they named "I Feel What You Feel If You Are Similar to Me." So this was done by observing touch in two trials, either an in-group or out-group. In-group would be people similar to the subject, and out-group would be people in a different group than the subject. Um, this was done through ethnicity and political affiliation. Shown here is the political affiliation results and a diagram of the experimental design. In-group perception of touch was, as you can see, significantly increased. Um, was increased compared to the outgroup, supporting that the similarity between the observed person and the observer increased the tactile stimulation. So, for here, the conservative and the conservative face are receiving higher touch stimuli as seen in red. And here the Democratic face with the Democratic people are receiving higher touch stimuli. Um, Lastly, I think it's important to talk about the mirror touch synesthesia relation to psychology. And because mirror touch synesthetes have the ability to physically feel another person's sensation, it is often talked about in psychology in its regard to empathy, as empathy's very definition is the ability to understand and share the feelings of others. The mirror neuron circuit for the mirror touch system talked about previously is implicated in empathy through nonverbal communications. Examples can be observation and imitation of facial expressions, tone of voice, and actions that indicate emotional states. Facial expressions can include things such as eye contact, smiling or crying. Tone of voice can include yelling or laughing, and actions um, can include behaviors such as fidgeting when somebody's nervous or excited, their posture, or even the speed of which they are walking. Empathy is theorized to have two main factors: cognitive and affective or emotional empathy, as seen here. Cognitive empathy is usually critical thinking or the cognitive processes that predict and understand another's mental or emotional state. Effective and emotional empathy is experiencing the same appropriate emotional response as the product of another's emotional state, or feeling the same as another person is feeling. Um, in the above in the above study, in Banassi and Ward's experiment, that supports the existence of mirror touch synesthesia through the congruent and incongruent trials of actual touch versus observed touch. They also, at the end, had participants complete an empathy quotient, which is a self-report scale meant to measure empathy. The empathy quotient contains three subscales: cognitive empathy, emotional reactivity, and social skills. Emotional or affective empathy on this quotient is measured by the subscale of emotional reactivity. And as you can see by the significance of the p-value, the mirror touch synesthetes only showed a significant higher score for the empathy quotient in the emotional reactivity subscale. This basically means that mere touch synesthetes don't cognitively understand others' emotions more or have better social skills than others, but do experience and respond more to the emotional state of others, which is logical considering people who have mirror touch synesthesia can not only understand the emotional states of another, but also tangibly sense the emotional and physical states of another. That is all the information I have for you today about mirror touch synesthesia. I hope you got a broad understanding of the topic, and I will see you in class.